an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Fullmetal Alchemist, Brotherhood. Episode 18, The Arrogant Poem of a Small Human. Quite a title. In this episode, I was right. Ross is alive. And I got so many of my questions about how that happened answered. And it was wonderful. And it was super fun to watch. Even if I hadn't figured it out, it would have been amazing. But honestly, having gotten some of it and not all of it made this very, very satisfying. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. What's up, Max? So, yeah, I have run across this before and been afraid of it because I don't ever know how y'all are going to feel about it. And the thing about it is that you're going to lose some and you're going to win some. So I always worry that if people are like excited about a particular mystery or a reveal, that if I actually figure it out, it's going to ruin it for like the actual recording, for the content, if that makes sense. And there was a whole thing with Mistborn where I figured something out and I didn't even realize that it was supposed to be a mystery. I just was like, okay, that's probably what's going on there. And then it turned out that it was supposed to be a mystery and there was like a big reveal moment. And I was just kind of like, well, yeah, like I thought we all knew that by now. And I felt bad because people were like, bitch, how you ruined everything kind of thing. And I won't lie. I was a little bit concerned that if I was right about Ross, y'all were going to be pissy about it. And I don't mean like pissy sounds dismissive. I don't mean it to be dismissive. I mean more like, you know, part of the fun of following Unspoiled stuff is watching somebody react to a thing and watching them go through the same like phases of grief sometimes that you went through. And if they figure out something that you didn't figure out, while you were watching, you don't get that like vicarious, yeah, I know how that feels kind of thing. However, maybe some of you had figured it out. And so watching me start to put pieces together, you were like, see, okay, that's also what I was wondering so I'm just going to do my thing the way that I always do. If I start to figure a thing out, I'm not going to pretend I'm not just to, why do that? So I hope that you guys can all rock with the fact that sometimes I may put things together. However, there are going to be plenty of times when I don't, as we have seen. I mean, there's so many mysteries going on in this show that this one, I don't feel like is a big deal because it was literally one episode, the mystery's set up, and then the next one it's solved. It's not like I figured out, something that spans multiple episodes or anything. But I just really don't want to like ruin the experience for people. I do get a little bit concerned about it. But like I said, even having figured out some of it, I still had so many questions about how certain things were done that getting this episode to tell me and lay out the specifics about a lot of it was exactly what I wanted. And it was really like, because I had figured out some. I was on the right track, but I hadn't completely called every step of how it all worked. And thus, there were still a lot of weird giant holes in my theory that kind of made me feel like, well, maybe I'm just completely wrong, And so I thought this was super fun. Damien says, I was just sitting here laughing. B. Moore says, you tortured yourself a lot more thinking you were going into a conspiracy spiral versus all of us that just popped in the next episode. That's true too. Like, depending on how you've watched this, you're going to have a totally different experience than me going one at a time. But some of you may have watched it, as it was being released and had to stew over it for a week. So yeah, I would be curious to know how all of you guys reacted to the last episode, and if you took it at face value that she was killed, or if you thought probably she wasn't, or, whatever. But anyway, so this episode begins with Armstrong bringing Eric, why do I keep doing that? It's because their last name is Elric, bringing Ed to the train and getting off in this like weird it's sort of an isolated area, and they have been given orders to come here and rendezvous with somebody. And Major Armstrong, he has this particular expression on his face that I really enjoyed, where he obviously is going to follow orders, and he is going to keep a stoic face on things, but you can tell he does not like what he's being asked to do. He does not approve of this. I am assuming, right? He wasn't in on any of this. That might actually be like more directly explained later on in the episode, but I have to guess that a lot of folks didn't know things, and it winds up sort of coming together later. But okay. So as they meet up with Lieutenant Breda, and Edward reacts to this guy like he knows who he is, but I have to be honest, guys, I don't know this guy or remember him. Should I? Because I know that there have been a few things where a character turns up and we find out, I find out, I should say, they are from a scene that was in the manga but got cut from the show or whatever. I am not clear on whether or not I'm meant to remember him, because I do not. So if you guys want to refresh me, that's fine. And then we jump back to Al. And him and Winry are in that room talking about what the fuck could have happened. And they're asking some of the same questions I asked, namely, Winry's he said he was taking him somewhere for repairs, but I'm right here. So what's the deal? This clearly isn't what is going on. It's not as simple as what they're saying. I wish somebody would tell us what's going on. And then they look up, and Ling is sitting there, having climbed in through the window, and is like, yeah, what's up? I could tell you what happened. And they're like, where did you come from? He climbed in the window. He's basically embraced the fact that he's like a fugitive after getting broken out of jail. So yeah, he just climbed in the window because why not? And he is here to walk them through the, basically the info dump about what happened. Oh, okay. Damien says he's one of Mustang's goons. You don't see him much except that he's called up by Mustang during the roll call of his peeps. So basically the reason that Ed reacted the way he did was because he was sent off and then greeted by somebody who works for Colonel Mustard and was like, oh shit, this might be a bad thing because Colonel Mustard has gone bad, as we all know. I don't like it. Okay, that makes sense. So he says, Ling says, there's no reason to worry about Ed's well-being. I'm sure he's just fine. And as he says this, we cut to them on horses riding out in the middle of the desert, crossing this border. And Ed, I really appreciated this being mentioned. The sun is beating down on them. It's been a long ride and they are really just exhausted. But Ed has metal body parts. So he is absolutely dying in this heat because it's all soaking it up. And that never even occurred to me. He says something about how it nearly seared through his skin because it got so hot. And like, that is no exaggeration, I'm sure. You guys know, you leave anything metal in sunlight, it is wild how hot that shit gets. And it doesn't even have to be summertime, you know? And he's in the middle of a goddamn desert. So yeah, they have this like, sort of well at the ruins, thank God. So they can water the horses and Ed can sink in and get refreshed a little bit. And it turns out the ruins that they are at are the ruins of Xerxes, which is where Ling had mentioned wanting to go. He had said something about like taking the long way through the desert in order to get to visit them. And we have a little bit of a fable that is told to us here. Ed is talking about the Eastern sage and says, it's a story about the origin of alchemy in Amestris, which is there, right? Because they don't use the word Amestris often in this show. It claims the entire kingdom of Xerxes was destroyed in a single night and that the only survivor wandered into Amestris shortly afterward. He was the one who went on to spread the science of alchemy. And this other dude, the one who works for Ling, is like, that's weird. We have a similar legend in Qing about a drifter from the West. It's said that his teachings were combined with our ancient techniques to form the alchemy we practice today. So each of them believes that their magic basically comes from somebody from the other side of the border, which is really interesting. I wonder why it has to be like, I guess it makes sense because it's, you know, as close to sort of like a god came down and gave us this knowledge sort of thing. And just the fact that both of them have never, you know, they've never heard each other's stories before, and they're both realizing how similar what they've been taught actually is, despite being from totally different places. It's so weird when that happens, you know, like when you start to study religion when you're younger, and I say study in quotes, just more like when you begin to find out about religions, and you really thought something was like specific to one religion, and then you begin to find out, oh no, a bunch of different religions actually have this like you know, like Noah's flood, the whole thing with that is like, there's just very little that there isn't a version of it somewhere in another faith as well, you know? So yeah, I do like this moment of them sort of taking a moment and going, huh, okay, wild. So they're looking through these ruins, and Breda says, if Xerxes was in such an advanced society, how were they wiped out in a single night? And Fu says, well, it might just be legend. That might be all there is to it. And as they're walking through, they come across what looks like what do they call these? The alchemical circles? And Ed stops because it's familiar, but of course, like the top of it is missing. So he gets frustrated later on. He comes and takes a closer look at it, and it's just like, God damn it. How come all of it can't be here to make this easier for me? The ruins, by the way, I was sort of expecting them to be a few buildings, you know, but it's essentially an entire city. It's big. There's a lot here. Transmutation circle. Thank you guys. Buh. Erica says, it's a pretty great disability representation. We don't get a lot of that in media unless it's inspirational. She puts in little, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing how we deal with disability. We are not comfortable with it. It is, yeah, we have an ugly relationship. So then all of a sudden, he hears somebody call Edward, and he looks up, and there is Lieutenant Ross waving to him, and we get Colonel Mustard's voice, back east where I was. It's a nice place. None of the big city noise, and lots of beautiful women. And then the camera focuses on her. It's a really good reveal, you guys. It's so good. You know what? Even, and like, again, I had figured out parts of it, but like back east, a beautiful place with lots of beautiful women, I was just kind of like, what is your deal right now, Colonel Mustard? Why are you acting like this? But I never thought about how maybe him acting so out of character is directly related to this. I thought maybe it was like tangentially. Do you know what I mean? And it's being kind of like code in his little way. It's very good. I just really enjoyed this. And I love how Ed reacts just like the damn colonel. And he like looks a little mad, but he's also really happy. And then, of course, there's Armstrong, who basically bursts into tears before, of course, all of the roses and sparkles appear behind him. And he just starts chasing Ross around because he is like so delighted to see. He says something like, the subtitle says, "My heart has been congested with grief." Oh my God. He's so great. And yeah, this was the best place to bring her, that they could hide her and not, get found out. And then we have the fade into what's going on. Breda brings the newspaper to Colonel Mustard, and he says they make a point of arresting her in public, and now they announce her guilt to the newspapers before she's even had a trial? Something's not right. Y'all, I cannot tell you how much I appreciated that there was no trial is like part of the canon. It is not, there was a really sudden, abrupt trial and we didn't get to see any of the proceedings. There wasn't one. That's just very gratifying for me. Like I needed that to be explained, and I didn't expect it to be. I expected it to just be like one of those things that happens in media where there's a lot going on. They'll just skip over a thing and not really explain it. And it's not like hugely important, so you don't obsess over it, but you do kind of go, but wait, what? And it just made me really happy to see that they were going to like explicitly address it, and for it to be addressed in such a way that the person who noticed is clearly like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, this is what leads him to realizing that something's up. And he picks up the phone because it's ringing, and it turns out that it's Falman. And fucking Barry the Chopper grabs the phone away. And, yo, Mustard, you seen today's paper? Because there's an interesting article on. And I love this. He has to jump up and be like, "Hey, Bunny, you know better than to call me at work like this is his girlfriend," which winds up being a really good cover later for when he's talking to Hawkeye, who was indeed in on it. And she was turning in her, well, not turning in her badge. She was asking for leave for show, but it looked like she was just really mad at him. This just, it fits so well. It was very, very satisfying. This made me really happy. So then we go to Mustang on an outside line as he's being guarded and talking to Barry. And I just really, again, the whole thing with the hole in his hand gets brought up. He's saying, "Are you really sure about this?" And Barry is like, "Oh yeah, the lieutenant fired a bullet, but it was at me, not at Hughes, and I've still got the hole in my fucking hand." Thank you. He has the hole in it. It's like, this makes me so happy. I just really like this stuff. Guys, there is nothing as satisfying as like a mystery that really solidly locks together, like, because y'all know what I mean. There are some where you're like, okay, I mean, I guess, and you'll let it slide, but there's like a big part of you that's going, this is bullshit though. And everything that I had been like, but what about this last episode the show is like, give us a second. Would you just stop? Listen. Watch the next one and shut up. But I couldn't watch the next one and shut up show. I'm sorry, but I'm not allowed. So Barry says, I've got a proposition you might like. And then, gotcha. I promise not to kill anyone. Ha ha! What did I say? And this dude who is taking care of him, evidently, like, it's unclear how much he actually gets to know about the plan's specifics, but he is standing there and he knows what's going on to a degree, but he, like, you know, like I said, we're not clear on just how much he knows. So then Colonel Mustard gives a shopping list to this dude, 60 pounds of pork, carbon, some ammonia. What is this? And he says the ingredients for a well-cooked corpse. And this dude immediately jumps to that he's doing human transmutation, which I'm like, why would he want it cooked then? Dude, use your head. Come on. I'm going to whip up something that looks like a human corpse. And he asks, what about when they do the autopsy? They'll check dental records. I know that because this is addressed, there's an explanation. But do we get that explanation this episode? I don't recall how he does fake the teeth. I'm sure as I'm like going through this, talking to you guys about it, it'll pop up. But Damien says Mustang and his team can be terrifying in their competence. It's beautiful. Yeah, and like I said, you guys, him hiding things in such an incompetent way, the episode before last, really shook my faith. So I didn't know whether I was supposed to see him as competent or not. It was just like, I couldn't decide what to think. So that paired up pretty well too, although I'm not sure if that was intentional or not. So B. Moore says, there isn't much in this series you have to let slide. That's one of its strengths. Yeah, that's definitely proving true. Yeah, that's something that I've been repeatedly noticing. But yet, you know, nothing is perfect. So every time that something comes up, I still stop and I'm like, well, maybe this time is the time something has to be let slide. Has to be allowed to slide. I don't know how to say that. So, Erica says, I don't remember if we get it, and I'm hoping that my suspicion is unfounded, the explanation of dental records. Yeah, I'm not sure because, like, this dude asks it specifically, and then Colonel Mustard just says, don't worry, I've got it under control. And that's all he says. I'm not claiming to be an expert on human anatomy, but I've got plenty of experience burning corpses. That's it. You know, he doesn't say anything about the teeth, so I don't know. So then we have the encounter in the alley, and Maria Ross is stopped right by a sort of dumpster, and that weird ass fucking human corpse is pulled out, human looking corpse. It has teeth already, so I'm assuming that he managed to just make the teeth. And he says, from this point on, you're dead. And he snaps his fingers, and that is what we see light up. And then he takes her bracelet, chars the fuck out of that, and puts it around its wrist. And then grabs her and puts her into the dumpster that the body was in. And there's an entrance from the dumpster. There's like a little hole through the wall into the building next door. So that is how she got out of there. In all of the like things that I was running through last episode, I never asked the question, if that isn't Ross on the ground, where did she go? I don't know why I didn't even think about that. If the death was being faked, how did I think she got out of that alley? I think I assumed that she could have just hidden somewhere because the alley looked sort of crowded enough with junk, but they go through the whole thing like a fucking crime scene as it is later on. So I should have known there's no opportunity for her to get away after hiding if that was the way that they played it, you know? B. Moore says we get an explanation on the teeth, but not this episode. Cool. Damien says, I suspect that was part of why he needed the other ingredients that weren't just the meat. Oh, okay. I thought that the ammonia and stuff was like meant to be sort of the chemical reaction of blood with heat, but I don't know anything about how that works. So that was just my weird assumption. So yeah, this, little escape hidey hole, it's just like perfectly set up. And then we see Edward come running down the alley just in time for all of this to have been wrapped up. And they even have a way of like covering up this hidey hole so that if anybody were to look in the dumpster, they wouldn't immediately spot this giant gaping hole in the back. And I really appreciated some of the subtlety of these scenes as well, because Ross, while she's being saved and is obviously like grateful for that, you can see that she's like kind of hurt, you know? Havoc is like getting her and being like, okay, this way. And she stops for a minute and sort of looks back in an attitude that for me was really giving, all right, but this is fucked up though. You know, and I really appreciated that. It's not like, I think were I in her position, I would be way too concerned with saving my own skin to stop and think about how fucked up it is in the moment. But I am more than willing to believe that other people would have a different reaction. And considering what she knows has just been set up is her death, it's understandable that maybe she's having a moment of like, wait, I'm just supposed to let people think I'm dead? I don't know if I should do. Well, I guess what else am I going to do? All right, you know? And later on, she's given the opportunity to tell her parents that she's actually okay. And she doesn't take it because she's worried about them being in danger from knowing too much information, which I think is really smart, but also how devastating is that? You know, it reminds me of Hermione, like memory wiping her parents of her existence before she sends them to Australia to do whatever the fuck. It's just when people have to continue to go on believing somebody is dead for their own safety, that fucking gets to me, man. It's rough. So yeah, they're talking about Barry the Chopper. The orders I've been given are to personally escort this woman east to take refuge. We all rendezvous here in one big effort to aid the lieutenant's escape. And Ed is like, I can't believe that he was able to fool us like that. Like, holy shit. And Fu says, yeah, that's why he let you like see the body, because he knew that you probably weren't going to believe just a word on the street. And I just really appreciate Ed being like, all right, I get it. He really got me though. That was pretty good. And then this dude says, he said he didn't want to take a chance on some hot-tempered kid endangering the operation. And of course, Ed absolutely flips his shit, thus proving the point. Ed, it's really surprising that your power isn't fire related, because you really need to like get therapy for anger management, sir. So then they talk about what's going to come next, because just getting her out of here doesn't like solve the problem. They still don't know who actually committed the murder. They just know that she was the scapegoat here. And he says he's got a plan to reel in the puppeteer that's behind the conspiracy. And I love Ed is in the middle of still yelling about his insult when he stops and goes, wait, what did you say? And they're going to use Barry they're bound to send someone to reclaim Barry. And then we see that dude, that feral dude, standing at an overpass, looking down at the city, growling. And spoilers, we find out that indeed, that is Barry's body that his spirit was stolen from. And his assumption, we don't know if this is right, but what he thinks is that they took the soul of an animal and put it in his body, and that's why he's acting like this. Which is really interesting. Like, being able to do that never occurred to me. But, you know, if you can take people's souls out of their body and bind it to another thing, I guess then you have an empty vessel to put something else in. What I think what was my sort of obstacle in thinking this way is that Al only got bound to armor because his body was gone, right? It was like the only option. And I didn't really stop and think about, if you're going to bind somebody to armor, but they did have a perfectly functional working human body, what do you do with that once it's empty of a soul? And what I'm sort of wondering, is it possible to get somebody like, I'm thinking about Dollhouse, if you guys have seen that show, very problematic, but in some ways very interesting. There is a whole thing with people being able to like swap bodies, and those whose bodies they swap into are not necessarily consenting. So could you take somebody, yank their soul into some object, and then have your soul yanked out and dropped into their body and just take it? Is that a thing you could do? I'm assuming it would be extremely time consuming and messy to do it, but it sounds like it's potentially possible. I don't know. I'm just curious about how any of that would work now that we have like the confirmation that a body can be kept alive. I was sort of assuming if you yank a spirit out of the body, that body dies. I never really thought about whether or not it would just be in basically like a vegetative state, like a coma. And if that's the case, then that opens up like a lot of other possibilities, you know? So then we have Winry and Ling and Al all talking about everything that's been going on, and the, you know, secret. I struck up a deal with Barry to help him out with the jailbreak in exchange for the secret to his immortality. But of course, the science guys that put me in his, he says, that put me in this body are all dead. And it's not like I know how they did it. And I love this. Ling is just like, well, that's not fair. And Barry says, you could talk to that Alphonse kid because he's also just a soul glued to metal. So here I am. You're supposed to tell me your secret. And I was promised you'd tell me. There is something about how completely certain he is that this is going to go the way he wants that I found so funny. I was promised. They told me you'd tell me. I mean, he has faith. I'll give him that. He is perfectly confident he is going to get the shit that he wants. I guess that's what it's like to be a prince. Excuse me. Erica says Dollhouse is very good, but you have to unpack a lot of the messed up things with consent there. Excuse me. Yeah. And that's the thing is like, they address a lot of it within the context of the show, but I don't know how some of that holds up because I haven't gone back and watched it since fucking like 2000, you know? Oh, B. Moore says, Barry said in this episode that putting a different soul in a body causes it to decay like his. Interesting. Okay. So you theoretically could do it, but you wouldn't be able to stay in it. You would have to use it and then jump back out into your own shit. Assuming that you're allowed to do that. Like, if Barry got put back into his own body, would it stop decaying? What I love, by the way, about this whole thing, guys, Barry, has no desire to get his own body back. I was sure that he was going to see it and be like, oh my God, my body that they stole from me, I can get it back. No. His first instinct is, let me chop it up, which honestly, that is so fucking hysterical to me. That is such an inspired direction to go in that I don't think would ever have entered my head. I just genuinely, there are moments where I'm going through media and I realize how unimaginative I am. And it's moments like this where a completely different reaction happens that makes total sense in context, but that I so wasn't thinking that it didn't even like enter my mind anything but what I expected could happen. And I suddenly am like, wow, I'm boring. I just like fully expect tropes. I really do, you know? So he just wants to chop up himself. And I guess that's when it's mentioned be more about, well, don't you want your own body back? And he's like, this piece of shit, look at it. No, like, I've got this sick ass suit of armor. I'm good. And I guess that makes sense. Like, yeah. And Al has to explain to Ling, like, I don't know how to do it. I had nothing to do with my body, like, being disappeared, you know? Like, not really. And then we cut to our friends drawing pictures of the various homunculi that they have run into and the symbols that they have come across. The Ouroboros tattoo and I think a transmutation circle, but it's like, you know, just a very basic shape. And I really also appreciated Ross is like, I cannot believe that I'm stuck in this. I had nothing to do with it. Literally nothing. And yet I was about to be like executed for it. This is some shit. And that didn't really enter my head either. That like, you know, because Ross is part of the show, I think of her as being involved in the conspiracy, like in a way. But I didn't stop to really think like she genuinely isn't actually part of this in any way. She hasn't been brought into the inner circle or been at any of the scenes of anything except for the like Fifth Laboratory. There's just not a lot that connects her to what's been going on. So yeah, this just splashed onto her out of nowhere. And that really sucks. Like, you know, this is the sort of thing where we always in our lives want to think that everything is a result of our own choices. And it's just bullshit. Like things happen to you. It's not necessarily a get out of jail free card because you also make your choices in that context. But you don't have control over everything as much as we love to tell ourselves that. And this moment is just, you know, she was keeping her nose clean and doing her job and still fucking wound up being framed for murder. Like, you know, and then they are sitting around and talking to Ed, about what he's planning to do next. And he's basically like, I guess I just have to keep moving forward because we did what we did. We are unable to undo it at this point. General Hughes is dead and his wife, his widow, told me to keep going. There are people who are supporting us and helping us as much as they can. And if I don't keep pushing it, these fucking things that are out here causing trouble can just keep on picking on random people or keep killing people who are getting closer to the truth. And the only thing that I kind of wish was addressed in his monologue here is that it's too far into what's been happening for him to actually give up. You know, it's sort of treated like it's his moment to decide if he's going to stop looking for the truth about the Philosopher's Stone. But Hughes is dead. There's an active conspiracy to frame Ross. Whether or not Edward decided to drop it with the Philosopher's Stone, in my opinion, would not actually matter. It wouldn't stop anything. I don't believe that at this point the homunculi are going to just back off. They've mentioned, I think, potentially using Colonel Mustard as a sacrifice as well, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody else. I feel like it was him, though. And so, like, yeah, it's being all sort of put on Edward to decide, as if, you know, you can decide whether or not to stop, and we can just go on with our lives, and everybody will be safe, and you won't be drawing any further attention to this whole thing. But I don't feel like that's true at all. It's fine for it to be like a symbolic moment of him realizing, but it's just too deep, and too much of it has been exposed now. It's not about him at all anymore, really. You know, I don't think it was ever about him, really. He was a part of it, but it hasn't felt like it's about him. So I don't know. That was just like one of those moments that I was like, this is a lot of monologuing to get to a conclusion that is sort of irrelevant. Which, you know, it's fine. That'll happen. So they are talking to Ross then about what's going to be in her future. She says she's going to go to Jing, and is taught that told that she could probably, you know, find asylum there. And she is really going into this blind. There's no impression that she's ever been to Jing before. And when she's asking Fu about what it's like, it's so funny. He says something like, it's full of hard-working people. And I was just like, what else is he going to say, I guess, you know? And Ross, before she leaves, is like, tell Colonel Mustard, I owe him a huge debt. And if he ever needs anything, I will be there in a second to help out with it, because he has saved my life, you know? And I love, she reaches out to like, hug Edward, and she says to take care of himself. And he says that he's grateful for her slapping him. Or no, shaking hands. My bad. It looked like she was going to go in for a hug, but I forgot. They just shake hands because she's not treating him like a kid. Good for you. So yeah, this is just a really satisfying wrap up to what's going on there. So then we go to the whole scene of what's going on with Barry the Chopper and Havoc and, what's her face? Hawkeye. Sorry. I know it was incredibly disrespectful for me to say what's her face about Hawkeye. Don't come for me. And it turns out that they're all keeping an eye on what's going on with Barry, because they figured whoever was working on these experiments is going to like recognize Barry, I guess, and come to take him down, which is interesting. I'm not entirely sure, like, why. I guess just the loose end probably is the problem. Damien says since Envy saw her there, that's probably how they zeroed in on her to use against Hughes and to frame up here. Since Envy saw Ross, is that what you mean? That's probably how they zeroed in on her to... Sorry, Damien, I think that I moved along in the conversation before I saw your comment, so I've lost track of what was happening. So yeah, we get this moment of his body like coming in and attacking, and the guard like lifts his gun and is about to shoot the thing. And of course, Barry is like, wait a second. I haven't seen this guy in a while. This was so funny to me when he says it that way. Like, this is a separate being from him. And Havoc comes in and starts to unload on this creature. And the guard, again, what is his name? Like Falman? because Havoc is in a full disguise, he initially tries to defend against him. And then he realizes that Havoc is aiming at the enemy and is like, oh shit, okay. But he realizes that it's Havoc because he smells like an ashtray. And that is beautiful. That's inspired. That makes total sense. And I love that it's acknowledged that smoking makes you stink. Doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how much you think you managed to cover it up. It doesn't work and you reek. That's just a fact. It's fine, but just admit it to yourself. You know, me and Rashawn have talked about it because she smokes. And I'll always forget that she smokes because obviously, like, recording with her, she can just smoke and talk and I don't see it or anything. But anytime that we've been in person, I'm just like, oh, right. Because the cigarette smoke, just, you smell it, you know? Let's see. Be More says they went through a lot of effort to cover up the fifth laboratories, so Barry is another loose end. Okay, yeah. Erica says the way he said it made me think it was somebody else's body. I think Barry worded it weird. This guy. Yeah, exactly. Like, I figured even though he said it weirdly, I was like, oh, so it's his body. But yeah, he says it as if, oh, that's like my old friend. It's not like it's a body that's connected to him anymore. And I love fucking Havoc getting mad at Falman for calling out his name and just being like, man, what the hell? Why do you think I'm wearing this mask? And he's just like, I'm sorry about that. So don't do anything that would give away your involvement. They could be watching us from anywhere. So we have the continued fight here. And I love Barry just being like, aw, hey. And he wants them to take this dude alive. But honestly, if they were trying to kill him, they were doing a really bad job. Havoc was in a very small room and he had 2 guns and he takes so many shots. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be that this dude is like bulletproof or just like tougher skinned than usual, but they don't land a single shot until he is like coming down from the building. Like he climbs up the side and then leaps down on them and they get him in the arm. And when they get him in the arm, he kind of like comes to a halt completely. I sort of expected him to keep fighting, but instead he just screeches to a stop and is just like, ow. And I was sort of gratified by that because I feel like it would have been really easy to make him a Terminator, sort of, you know. But if he's got a spirit in him of an animal, like a feral animal, stopping when hurt, that feels right. You know, you have different kinds of animals. Some of them, you hurt them and they will go into fucking like beast mode. And that's a wrap. But I don't mind for this guy to just sort of stop and be like, oh, ow. So then we have Hawkeye watching from the rooftops. And it turns out that she is talking to Colonel Mustard. And that is who he is sort of pretending is like a love interest, and they're using a lot of code about what's going on so that she can keep him updated on the fight and how it's all going. And this is when Barry says it came to find me because it wants it wants its soul back. And I was like, oh, babe, like it made sense why he would think that. But it's just so not what's happening. And I felt a little bad that he thinks there's something sort of like an affection going on. And it's like, oh, sweetie, no, that's not it at all. So, yeah, that whole bit, we have, we jump from there to Ed, and he's looking at that transmutation circle statue sort of thing. And somebody tries to sneak up behind him, and Ed brings him down, no problem. And then all of a sudden, all of these Ishvalans pop up around him in the ruins. And this guy says, I'm afraid we're going to have to take you hostage until your military returns our holy land to us. And they said this, and I was like, that doesn't feel like it's going to work. And then Ed says that exact thing. One kid? They're not giving you shit back. Are you kidding me? And this guy says it was the death of a single child that triggered the entire Ishvalan civil war. So you really shouldn't doubt your significance in the eyes of history. I get what he means, but that just doesn't feel like the same situation to me. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I guess it's worth a shot. And then this woman comes out. She's an old lady with an eye patch, and she is yelling at this dude, telling him that he's being shameful. Are you trying to dishonor us? What the fuck are you doing right now? He looks very taken aback. And she says, he's not going to try and attack you again. And the kid with her is like, yeah, can you let that dude go? Because Ed still has him in like an arm lock. And when Ed is like, all right, are you going to kill me though? Like, what's happening? The old lady says, all right, your country ain't shit. We know this. But like, not all of you are personally responsible for the shit that happened. And we know that. We're not idiots. We were, a lot of us, saved by doctors from your country. So, you know, you suck, but also some of you aren't so bad. And it turns out that the people that saved them are Winry's parents. And I'm getting this right? And this is like really interesting to learn about this way. It turns out that they were medical personnel on the field, and despite everything beginning to fucking go pear-shaped, they wouldn't bail. And it got super bad, and eventually they were killed, but they still stayed, and it was just a sort of gesture of how committed they were to doing their job. I mean, I am sure they don't have the Hippocratic Oath in this universe, but it's the same idea where they were just like, I'm going to help as long as I can physically help. That's just how this works. And this lady says they were both murdered in cold blood by the hand of an Ishvalan they'd saved. And I am going to assume that was Scar, right? Because we see the tattoo and it looks the same, but I'm not positive if the tattoo is something that's like a part of a group or something. You know what I mean? Like, it might be something that belongs to more than one person, but it seems like, because she says a monk, and we know that this guy had a master at one point, and it just feels like it has to be connected. So I'm assuming that is Scar. And Ed is saying, would you deliver a message? Oh no, they ask him, give the rock bells our thanks and our apologies, as Ed leaves. And I was really surprised that they just let him go, because this dude comes up and it's like, we have to take you hostage. And I thought for sure, at least there was a general plan to take Ed into custody in some way. But this guy apparently just went off making up his own whole plan without checking with anyone or running it by anybody first. Not great, dude. Like, come on. So anyway, we go back to fucking Barry saying, I can't believe how lucky I am. Do you know how unusual it is to get to chop your own body into tiny little pieces? I just don't like Barry. What a great fucking character. He's like, I just gotta get my knives into it. That body's way past its expiration date. And apparently they've been smelling it. This is just cruel. I have to do it. It's my body and I'm putting it on the chopping block. And Havoc says, I said no. And up in the fucking tower is Hawkeye. And she's like, ugh, I'm going to have to deal with this. Hold on. And then she turns around and there is Gluttony walking up behind her. And she shoots him in the arm and he goes down. And then that shit heals right the fuck back up. And he stands up and glares down at her with that creepy fucking smile. And that is the end of the episode. I don't like this at all. I don't think that she's like anything's going to happen to her. But the fact that they are like personally here, I was really hoping they just sent Barry's body. And they just trusted that everything went to plan like a Bond villain. But evidently, there are more boots on the ground than I expected. And that's a shame. Okay. That is the end of the episode. You guys, this has just been really fun to cover, honestly. I don't know what the deal is still with what they're after, though. I'm like, maybe the thought is Father wants to make a Philosopher's Stone. And so he, we know that it takes human lives to do it. Maybe you need a human of like different types or something. And he's gathering different people who are particularly good at whatever alchemy they do as sacrifices because he thinks that they will be able to like contribute something particularly potent to the recipe, I guess is like the best way I can think to word that. But again, I'm just not entirely sure why a being that seems so advanced needs a Philosopher's Stone to begin with. So, because like the people who teamed up with these guys had what seemed like Philosopher's Stones, but they didn't actually last. There did come a point where they were overloaded with power and then they would just crumble away. So I guess he can't make one, or maybe they're just harder to make than, the whole, you have to sacrifice a human life. Like, yeah, we all figured that, right? Like, I was not surprised when it was revealed that that was the secret ingredient. But maybe it's like there's more to it even than that. Maybe you need people who are born at a certain time or have a particular like type of power. Yeah, I don't know. Michael says assembling like a Pokemon team. I mean, I guess, again, I am still not sure the variety of abilities in this universe. We've got Ed and he can work with metal. So can Al. Then we've got Captain Mustang who works with fire. What are some other ones that we have seen? There's, what was the name of the guy who worked with rock? And I don't remember, what was the guy who looked like the Monopoly Man? What was his ability? He did stuff with knives, right? I remember him like using knives that were on the end of chains, I think, at one point. But I don't recall what his alchemy was. Ice Guy, says Michael. Okay, Ice Guy. There's another one, right? And he's like the very first one we meet, right? He's the first episode. Yeah, maybe you need to get people who each work with an aspect of elements, because that could be, and like, as much as my instinct is to be like, well, metal isn't exactly an element, in certain traditions it is. When you think elements, a lot of us Americans, it's earth, air, fire, water. But in a lot of traditions, metal is one or wood is one. And they have 5 rather than 4. maybe that's what the deal is. But yeah, I don't know. And considering that they got human beings to work with them at all, what were they offering them? I guess the one dude they were offering like revenge, right? Because they have to make a deal somehow and convince these people that they can deliver. But then I'm assuming they would just kill them, that they wouldn't follow through on their shit. I'm assuming. B. Moore says, alchemy's a science, not magic, which means everyone can technically do everything. People just specialize due to talent and because you're better off in a fight doing one thing really well rather than 100 things at a mediocre level. Especially since that require drawing 100 different transmutation circles. Oh, the transmutation circles have to be different for each one? I didn't realize that. Okay, interesting. All right, so everybody can do everything. So then that doesn't make sense. I just wonder, like, why do they need multiple people? Huh. Curious and curiouser. Well, I don't know, guys. I don't have any further theories. Like that barely was a theory to begin with, and it's just completely not anything now. So I got nothing. But I'm very excited to keep watching. So, all right, guys, I'm going to wrap up. But don't forget to come by on Friday for the next episode. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.